right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the International Conference on Stigma, Faith and Community Day. We hope you were able to join us yesterday and are ready for more great content. By the way, the glitch with the posters has been corrected, so you should be able to view those today. Today, we will have 2 faith-based sessions, and all 4 of our work groups will be presenting about research or community work in their areas of interest. Please note that to access the 2 faith sessions, you will click the link in the agenda, and it will take you to the session outside the Whova platform. You may have to complete a brief registration to sign on, and then you will need to re-navigate back to Whova on your own after the session if you want to return to the main conference. Now, today's main content goes until 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but please make sure to check the community board for extra sessions led by attendees. Please, if you can, take the time to fill a session evaluation for each session that you attend, and those can be accessed within each session in the agenda. So now let's talk about our session right now, which is entitled Ending the Epidemic for Who? Considerations for Uplifting Youth Voices. Now, let me just give you all a quick rundown for how our session will work today. First off, I'll do a brief introduction of myself as well as the panelists, and then I'll invite each of our panelists to respond to a few questions. We don't have PowerPoint slides. Our intention today was really to just have a conversation amongst ourselves and with you all. After I invite the panelists to answer some questions, we will then invite the audience, you all, to share questions with us. Please use the chat function for that, and we'll be moderating that chat in real time. And then finally, we'll just do a quick wrap up and kind of final comments after the Q&A session. So let me introduce our wonderful panelists. First off, we have Sheila Alinda, who is a serial entrepreneur and freelance creative as well as technical writer. She's originally from Uganda and passionate about uplifting voices so that people can tell their own stories in their own words to change the world. We've got Brian C. Jones, who is an international advocate and activist, founder of the DIRT advocacy movement, founder of the Sankofa HIV initiative, and founding steering committee member and ambassador of the global U=U movement. We also have the wonderful Dr. Tiffany Dyer, who is an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics in the School of Public Health at the University of Maryland, College Park. She has many, many other titles. She and I are also former HIV Prevention Trials Network scholars together, and I'm excited to have all of these wonderful speakers. To introduce myself really quickly, my name is Dr. Alicia Mirage Bass, and I am a scientist at FHI 360, which is a large global nonprofit. I am also an adjunct professor at the Duke Global Health Institute and a visiting professor at UC San Francisco. So that's us. Thank you all, everyone. It's so great to see you all, even if it's virtual. Thank you for making time to chat today. And why don't we just go ahead and launch into some questions, if that's all right with you all.
Launch on.
All right, so this is actually a question I have for everyone, and anyone can start with their answer. Just jump in. What brought you all to the work that you do in HIV prevention? How did you come to this work? When did you come to this work? How did it start for you? And anyone can jump in to speak.
Well, it started with a diagnosis for me. Actually, I was diagnosed my senior year, going into my senior year at Florida A&M College, and I'm now in my 38th year of thriving with HIV. I was doing advocacy work before I realized it was advocacy work. I was taking care of friends who were dying, and even though I was taking care of them, I still didn't disclose my status. So after having cancer 3 times, college educated, traveled the world, I found myself with one leg chained to a prison bed, because I wanted to go to prison intentionally to die, because I didn't want my family to take care of me during this ugly death. But my higher power saw that that wasn't possible. And I came out with the worst, was stage 4 cancer. And when I came out, I gained acceptance of my status. I took back my life. I was doing the Anne Frank syndrome, like hiding, waiting for somebody to find me, but I took back my power. And since then, I'm going to close to 20 years now, I've been advocating. That was a mouthful, wasn't it?
That was everything.
Like, wow.
Thank you for your candor. That's an amazing story. And thank you for sharing with us that journey that you had to go through from being diagnosed, but to actually be that representation for others. It sounds like you were a caregiver before you were willing to be that advocate as well. And I think that's an amazing journey that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. I'm very humbled by your story. I think we're all in like the same area, but for some reason, I'm trapped in College Park. I'm like, wait a minute, I need to get on this freeway or something a little more often.
But for one thing, I love how your flower is behind you. It's saving, it's working you.
Thank you. It's like a
That's
crown.
perfect.
Everybody says it's like this lotus flower crown thing that
It's
I've got
perfect.
going on. Thank you so much. My journey is similar, but not the same. I've been on this journey since around 1993. And it started, my father was diagnosed with HIV, and it was around 94, 95-ish. And I know one of the primary things that he did, and I don't think it was acceptable at that time, and I don't know why. Maybe it was just his own rationale for doing this, but he told us all. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and then they were like, okay, let's go ahead and test you for HIV so we can rule that out. That was kind of that way. And it was a positive test. And while he told us, I knew that he still felt some internalized stigma around it. He didn't tell anyone else. I felt some sort of third party stigma. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't sure if my brothers knew or if I was the chosen one because I was a student at UCLA and blah, 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 kind of thing. And just the more he talked about it, the more we could advocate for him, ask him if he's taking his medications, et cetera. But through the journey, and as I got to grow and know people, I met so many more people who, similar to Brian, were working in the field of HIV, but had not disclosed their status. And it just sort of spoke to me in terms of, and why I wasn't, it wasn't my job to disclose my dad's status, but I was wondering why I was carrying that as well and not, being a voice for him as well, right? And so a lot of the work I do is with Black men who have sex with men, LGBTQ, sexual gender minority men, Black sexual minorities, and also transgender women, but also Black cisgender women, and trying to get an understanding of some of what we're going through as well as it pertains to what is still highly stigmatized and just, as we know, doesn't need to be. Mm-hmm. So that was my journey. It's been about 25 years or so.
Thank you, Tiffany. So I think that that's a really interesting kind of distinction of a perspective where you experienced a loved one being diagnosed and had to look at their journey. And in some ways you went along on that journey, right? And so even the way that you talk about the fact that you weren't in a place where you were supposed to be disclosing your father's status, right? And so some of that stigma component is very real. And I think it speaks to Martha's question in the chat of, why wouldn't you want your family to know? There's a lot of reasons why even the people who love you the most in the world might still be stigmatizing you. Either it's because they don't know the ins and outs of how HIV is transmitted. It has been a stigmatized illness from the very beginning, right? Especially in the Black community where we have a lot of faith norms and cultural norms. And there's this perception that HIV is because you were doing something risky or it's a gay man's disease, none of which is accurate. But a family member might love you and not know how to navigate those stigma pieces, right? And so I think to Brian's point, back in the early 80s, the death and the stigma that was associated with being diagnosed with HIV was very real. And even when the family members love you, they weren't necessarily in a place or capable of navigating that with you and giving you the love and support that you need. So I hope that answers your question, Martha. Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, and also I really think for people, it's, as parents, I mean, this is my dad, right? So as parents, I mean, a lot of us are parents or caregivers for someone. I think it's inherent if you're a godparent, if you're an actual parent, if you're a grandparent, the first thing we want to do is protect our kids and people. And so I think part of that is a desire to not have people worry about things that you kind of don't have much control over in the early 90s, right? And right now it's, you have advocates and allies and all of these things. But at the time, like Brian said, I think there was a lot of fear and a lot of, and this, of course, the stigma. But I think as a father, it was like, well, I don't want you to carry this because I don't know how to carry it, So it was kind of like his way of protecting us. But he told us it was his other siblings and things that didn't, right? But he told us. I mean, we were like, because he I don't know why, but he did. And I was always happy that he did. So anyway, I don't want to take over the thing, but I don't want to say that part about parents wanting to.
I want to add one thing. I don't want to take away from. Is it Sheila?
Yes.
What HIV looked like in terms of services and support groups, it was non-existent then. There weren't even doctors back then when I was diagnosed, 83, 84. So it looked different. I didn't even have acceptance. So me not having acceptance, I couldn't even tell myself in a room by myself that I had AIDS. Actually, it was GRID at the time. I'm done.
No,
Which is the
I think
stigma
it's
part.
important, and that has everything to do with that stigma piece. Thank you, Brian. Sheila, how about you? What's your story? How did you come to HIV prevention work?
It also began with my diagnosis, but growing up, I was a very inquisitive person and wanted to know why I had to take medication daily, and yet I was not sick, or why I would have to miss out some days out of my school term to just go pick my medication. So when I was 11, my dad couldn't bring himself to tell me. So he takes me to the hospital to meet a counselor, and she tells me about my diagnosis. Yeah. At first, it was very heartbreaking, and I tried to keep so much to myself and not wanting to talk about it and all that. But still in the same year, when I was still 11, I got to join the area clubs under the Elizabeth Glazer Pediatric AIDS. And through these clubs, they brought young children who are HIV positive to come together and share and learn, and they provided psychosocial support. And through all these learnings in the area club, that's where I got the passion to also, when I grow up, that I could support others. So fast forward, my really journey to begin the work was in 2018, when I got a chance to a scholarship to attend the Social Innovation Academy here in Uganda. It was begun by a German philanthropist, and the academy aims at supporting young people to be able to turn their challenges into opportunities. So it is something that I thought about. Is like, what can you do around HIV that you feel is something that could support the community and where you come from, and create a social business and create impact. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, Sheila. Brian, I think
Sheila's
you're
from Uganda. I was slated to go to Uganda, had got my shots, had my ticket right before they shut everything down. April 22nd, I was scheduled to fly out. They closed everything down a week before that, and I'm still waiting on them to open things up. Are you in Kampala?
Yes, I'm in Kampala. I'll be happy to have you.
Yeah, I was supposed to go for
love
the global U equals U. William was having a U equals U conference that was supposed to happen in April.
I know William.
Look
But
at that.
that's another life.
The world is this
Listen.
big, y'all. The world is
Yeah.
this big. So Brian, when you make it to Kampala, I'm come too. I've been working with Makerere University in Uganda. I got some friends I need to visit. We just probably need to have a meetup in Kampala. That's what I'm thinking. You know what I mean? Tiffany, you're coming too. So
I was going to say yes.
So great.
it's gonna be fun, y'all. It's gonna be fun. So thank you for sharing your journey with us too, Sheila. I think your perspective is a really powerful one, right? How do you process being told as a child you have HIV? What does that sound like? What does that feel like? Who do you talk to about it? How do you come to some kind of terms with the illness? And it sounds like for you, that was taking some of that ownership as you got older and doing some of that advocacy work as an adult to try to support others living with HIV. I think that's so powerful. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, that's very true. I still remember the conversation I had with the counselor, and she was so loving and caring. It was a very touching conversation. So she sat me down. She was like, your dad told me you're very bright and you want to become a doctor. And I'm like, yes. She told me I'm going to speak to someone who will inspire me to become a doctor one day. So she asked me, do you know how HIV is spread? I tell her because we had learned at school. I was in my last year of primary school, so we had learned something about HIV, how it's spread and how it's contracted. So I share with her, and then later she tells me, she asks me, what do you think mom died of? I'm like, I don't know. I know mom died. I was 6, but I don't think I understood why she died. And then she also asks me, what would you do if one of your family had HIV, or you found out one of your family members had HIV? I told her I would support them, help them take medication, because we had, it's called the AIDS support organization here in Uganda. It normally did dramas in different schools. So they would come to school and do drama. So I had seen people who had testified that lived with HIV for 14 years, they're on medication. So I told her I would support the person, they take medication. I know people from the organization who have done that. And she's like, okay, now if somebody told you you had HIV, what would you do? I said, I would run and throw myself in the river. And then she was sitting on the other side of the table. She comes back and all she did was hug me. And because I started joining the dots, I'm like, don't tell me. And I started breaking down. She was like, no, you're going to be fine. But you already said people are taking medication and living together. So it was something that I had to come to terms with after a long time.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Sheila. Oh my goodness. You just took my whole heart walking us through what that looks like. I think you had such a sensitive counselor, but that doesn't take away the feelings, right? It doesn't take away that you can cognitively understand, yes, you can take medication. Yes, you can live a full life. That does not mean that your feelings and your spirit immediately knows how to process it, right? Especially if you're a child. So thank you for sharing that with us. That is so, so powerful. And I'll also, if I ask the question, I'll answer it too. I came to HIV prevention work because the first love of my life, my little boyfriend, after we broke up, he was diagnosed with HIV, and I literally felt like the record stopped. Like I couldn't believe it when he called me and told me. And I found myself feeling afraid, not because cognitively I knew, yes, you can live a full life with HIV, but there was so much I did not know about it. And when I don't understand something, then I'm like, no, I need to learn everything. I need to process it somehow. I need to understand, I need to learn. Then I became a volunteer at Alachua County. I was in Gainesville, Florida at the time. I started volunteering at the Alachua County Health Department because they had a support group that was called PEP, Positives Empowering Positives. And just getting to sit there and learn from people and hear their stories, it was so powerful. And then I moved to Baltimore to go to school, and the rates of HIV in Baltimore have been epidemic since the very beginning. So, whereas I start out in diabetes prevention work way back when as an undergraduate, the second I moved to Baltimore and I had someone who was so close to me in my life now navigating what it looked like to live with HIV, it was done. And I've been here ever since. And so I think what I wanted to convey with these questions, and I'm sure our audience has heard, is that there's always personal motivation for why we do the work that we do. And I think for people who work in HIV prevention, the work is personal, one way or the other. And I think that passion is very important to do this work. Brian, did you want to say something?
Never in a lifetime would I ever thought that I would be on a stage talking to thousands of people about my status. I did musical theater and was a singer, dancer, actor. I thought I would do that for the rest of my life, but never would I ever thought that I would be advocating like that, because someone close to me in my family found my medication and called me and said, why didn't you tell me you had AIDS? You have to tomorrow to tell everybody, or I'm going to tell them. But my mother knew, because she found out when she read a letter to me while I was in the county jail. It said, dear Mr. Jones, because of your AIDS status, we're denying you Social Security. Do you want me to tell anybody else? She kept going. She didn't stop. She didn't stumble. So I kind of knew everything would be all right. But Black women, or women period, are so strong. But I'm sure she was devastated when she hung up the phone. So she said, do you want me to tell anybody else? I said, no. So after it was confronted, everybody said, and the rest of my family members said, and okay, what's for dinner? But the person started telling people who friends of mine, and people would start coming up and say, well, such and such told me, yeah, I have HIV. Have you been tested? because I never want somebody to have a secret on me. And they thought that they had I got him now. So I was like, and left them with their mouth hanging open. So
I got you, but that's everything about taking your power back, right? And it's your decision how you want to disclose who. Nobody gets to hold
or
that over
I
your head.
share, because disclosure is a stigmatizing word, because the definition
Sure
of
is.
disclosure is
Fair enough.
new or secret information. So
Yes,
I
it
prefer to say share. And you'll
That's
see I've been
understood.
talking too much since preschool, so excuse me.
No, that's
No.
understood. That's understood. I think that's a point very well taken. I think that word has different connotations for different people, but you're absolutely right. We do have to interrogate the words that we use, especially when it comes to people talking about their status and identifying as someone who lives with HIV, right? Go ahead, Tiffany. I think you were going to say something.
No, I was saying thank you for that. I think, you know, being, again, as Alicia knows, being a researcher, I think that that's terminology that we use, and we're trying to reframe stuff, right? So again, we use words like disclose, we use words like risk, we use words like that, you know, and it's just like everything
Infected.
like this, you know. And one thing that I heard you
Yes.
say too is instead of people saying a long-term survivor, I've started saying, no, you're a long-term thriver, like, because surviving is just like getting through the day, like coping. How do you just, everybody, you know what I mean? But it's like people are living very well, okay? And it's, you're doing more than surviving, you're thriving, you're living.
I say that.
You're moving, you're expanding, you're doing a lot more than just got through the day. Let me wake up tomorrow, see what's going to be looking like. That's a whole different thing than I got stuff to do and I'm going to do it. And nobody is going to tell me how that's going to look. So that's what I'm going to do. Right. And so that's thriving. I heard you say that, Brian, when you said I'm thriving. And that's a whole different thing and a whole different framework.
Mm-hmm. So I see a comment in the chat from Ron that says it's taking your power back. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I see Elizabeth saying, yes, we thrive. Janessa saying, yes, thriver is so much more uplifting. That's very, very much the case.
Yeah.
So let's talk about another one of those research terms, right? So I know just in the last 2 years, I've heard ending the epidemic more times than I can count, than I can read. My eyes hurt from all the times I've read it and I hear people talking about it. Y'all tell me, what does that actually mean for Black people? What does ending the HIV epidemic actually mean for Black people? Not the research meaning, not the government funding meaning, none of that. What does it actually mean for us, y'all? And anybody can jump in, talk to me. What does it actually mean?
I'm gonna let Brian take this head on.
Well,
back on this because I already know.
You know, I was just ready to jump out my chair. I think what it means for Black folks and people of color, because Black folks and people of color are two different things. In my hood, people of color don't necessarily like Black folks or vice versa. So we have to be intentional about saying for Black people. And unless society is willing to give up some of that white privilege and have a conversation how privilege impacts everything, and then teaching white folks to leverage their privilege for the greater good, we're going to be in trouble. If we look back to the beginning of the epidemic in 1981, when the article first came out and the CDC first talked about HIV and AIDS, the article in the New York Times said these 41 or 44 gay men, and we knew they were gay white men, had this strange gay cancer. Well, they failed to mention that in that same calendar year, that 86 Black people had contracted the same gay cancer, but they didn't mention our numbers because privilege took precedent. Even the gay people whom they hated, the system hated, their numbers still took precedence over ours. They didn't start releasing our numbers to 1983. And even then, they only released the numbers of people who had deteriorated with these opportunistic infections or cancers. And they didn't mention people who had the antibodies or who showed these signs. And they only listed certain conditions. And that's where the slogan, women don't get HIV, they just die from it, came about. Because they didn't mention surgical cancer, which is unique to women, and especially Black women, because lack of care. So these women succumb to this illness because the CDC wasn't forthcoming with that information. So moving all the way forward, unless we're going to do a Sankofa moment and look back before we look forward, we're not going to end the epidemic for nobody, because It's HIV is just a symptom of systemic and structural disparities. It's a bigger picture. Our Lord says people don't have single issue fights because they don't live single issue lives. And our lives have so many intersections as to why we are at risk for HIV and AIDS.
Well, that's over. I have
I
nothing.
mean, we can pack up. I feel like
I'll pack it on up. Let's close it
We
down.
done.
It's over. Because the more you said, I was waiting. I said, I'm gonna jump on in here with some intersectionality, and that's it. Brother Jones already said it. That is it. It is the fact that you failed to recognize that there were Black people who were suffering from the same thing, because we sit at the intersection of race, some of us sexuality, sexual orientation, some of us gender identity. But then there are also intersections where we occupy other social positions, right? So even when we start thinking about social position, the hierarchy, this is what Brother Jones is talking about. The fact that no matter what your educational level, Black women are more likely to suffer from preterm everything, maternal mortality, preterm deliveries, the babies ain't doing good. No, you could have 2 PhDs and an MD, don't matter. And it's because of this systemic social positioning of, well, I'm just going to say Black folks. I'm going to leave it at Black folks right now. But again, thinking about people of color, but I'm specifically talking about Black people. And until one thing COVID pointed out was Black people sitting back going like, and like we knew it. We were like, it's gonna be us. We're gonna be the people that's gonna be dying. We're gonna be the people like it wasn't nothing us. It wasn't anything for us to have to go into quarantine. We've been up in the house. It wasn't anything for us to have to wear a mask. We've been being told what to do. It was everybody else like, oh my God, you're telling me what to do. My rights, my thing. Black people were like, look, you know what I mean? You haven't walked in my shoes. We've been doing this. So figure it out, do what you're gonna do. And it really took the cover, off of what we've known been going on for so long, which is systemic racism and white patriarchy and white supremacists, and just like you're saying, the system that we live in is the problem. And so a lot of times, even when it was like, oh, let's do some anti-Black racism stuff, and people would come to Black people like, how can I be I can't help you be anti-racist. I don't know what you're gonna do, because we have to undo the system, but it's in the fabric of this country. And it's I want to go to the thriving piece, because we are still thriving, because like Brother Jones said, EHE is and our 90-90-90, I wish it was in hands, within distance, hands, reach. I can't think of it right now. I'm getting emotional. But there's so much that needs to happen for that to happen. It's not just numbers. We're epidemiologists. It's not just going, oh, the rates are, because guess what? The incidence rates are the same. They ain't never been down. They've been 50,000 per year since 1980. They've never gone down. They weren't even counting DC for 15 years for some reason. Well, because it's not a state, right? But when they started counting DC and it was, the numbers went up the way they did, I was like, DC been dying. Didn't nobody even know? DC been dying like this whole time. And so it's just, again, like they looked at them brothers and didn't even count them in those 41 men that Brother Jones is talking about. We're invisible. Now we're visible, but we're always visible for the wrong reasons. They want to, you know what I'm saying? So it's we have to undo so much. I'm doing what I'm, doing. But as a sister on the streets, like I'd be mad, like walking around hot. You know what I mean? I don't know. Right? It's tough. And I want to focus on that thriving and that resilience that I know that we have as a people, because that's why we're here still. We weren't supposed to survive. We weren't supposed to survive none of this. Slavery, we supposed to been dead, but we just keep on going. We supposed to keep on going. And that's it.
We keep coming.
That's it. We keep coming. Like, what you gonna do next? It's just, we're here for a reason. And I think starting with what we're doing right now, which is talking to people who are interested in how we reduce the stigma that was thrown at us and at the community and at the world regarding HIV, is a good start, and also talking about the youth and just, I know that's later, but just where we go from here.
Mm-hmm. So I was just gonna keep listening. I forgot I was moderated. Preach, Brian. Talk to me, Tiffany. So I heard a lot of things that I think are really important. And Sheila,
I'm
you know, I
sorry.
didn't forget you, sis. I need your perspective too. I was very intentional when I asked and an epidemic for Black people, right? I am very clear on that distinction, y'all, because uplifting Black people does help other people of color, but you have to start in the Black community, especially if you are thinking about with the impact of HIV on communities of color. Black people is where you need to be focusing your time and attention. It's not to exclude others. It is to say uplifting us does benefit others too. The reverse is not necessarily true. So I wanted to ask that question very intentionally. And I heard you both say, HIV is not the real epidemic. Racism, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, those are the epidemics we actually need to be addressing and dealing with. And I think that is so well understood. I see Brian nodding too. Did you want to add to that, Brian? Does that feel accurate, what I was saying?
Yeah, but I'll let her go because, you know, I get long-winded and the commercial will come on.
Right, when they start
Sheila,
playing the
talk to
music,
me,
the
sis.
background music,
Y'all be
the
playing
wrap
the
it up
music
music,
like
when
at
you
the
give your speech.
Oscars.
Yes,
got
they
you.
start to do the wrap it
Sheila,
up
talk
music.
to me, dear. From your perspective, what does it mean for Black people? Because believe me, we mean globally. We do not just mean in the US.
I believe what Brian and Tyson have all said, it's definitely true, because most of the times we hear they say they're engaging the communities, they're having all these developments, but most of the times they actually never go back when they're going to develop a solution or anything to really engage the communities and understand what the people really need. They always just develop the intervention and now bring it to the people and ask them, this is what we have, instead of engaging them and trying to understand the community and their needs.
That's understood, Sheila. Thank you. So
So
it sounds like some of what we talked about around these structural pieces, the real underlying root causes are not about HIV. And I think for you, you were mentioning that community perspective, it's symbolic at best, or it's just completely missing entirely when people are doing this work in HIV prevention and ending the epidemic. Brian, did you want to mention something?
I mean, the whole ending the epidemic thing is just talk. It's just rhetoric, because access to care has been one of the biggest things. HIV criminalization laws, mass incarceration is real. HIV criminalization laws are just another notch in their belt for locking us up. They don't want to listen. All the organizations that get funding, most of them have never been in those zip codes physically that are most impacted. They sit in their office and they get all this funding and they create a nice little pamphlet and put it in the library at the top of the hill when they need to go down to the bottom of the hill. So they need to incorporate people living with HIV. You said that I was founder of DIRT. That's the dirt advocacy movement. I don't do grassroots advocacy. I do dirt advocacy, because dirt is an acronym for direct, inspiring, reachable, and teachable. It's a conversation for Black people that look like us, live like us, talk like us. It's stripped away of all pretense. And because you got to cultivate that dirt for the grass to grow. And you have got to be on the ground. And we've got to hold health departments accountable. And these other ASOs, they get all this funding, because by the time the money reaches the streets, it's just pennies to the dollar. And the epidemiology, I heard her say, she was an epidemiologist. If the reflectiveness of the epidemic or the epidata is saying that Black folks and people of color are most impacted, then let Black folks handle the money. We don't need you to stand in a line like we get government cheese. So for us to take care of people living with HIV. Let me be quiet, because I had a conversation somewhere else.
I think it's really important. I want to come back to a couple of things that you said, but Tiffany, did you want to mention something?
No, I really, I mean, I think it's one of, there's Jasmine. Okay, so I saw a name. There's it's all that, you know, it's, I think as I cannot speak for Alicia, I cannot, but I know for myself, it you know, we have to toe the line at some point, you know, because not only do I represent my community, I'm also an academic, right? And a scientist. And so it does get like, okay, the numbers are the numbers, we can all do the math and blah, 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 blah. They speak for themselves. But when it really comes to breaking down what we gonna do, that's when it's like time to take off the cap and gown and remove the little plaques off your wall, you know, and get down and dirty in the dirt as Dr. Jones just said, as Brother Jones just said. We're all
I got a
scholars of our
PhD in
lives, too.
HIV.
Yeah, listen, no, we're scholars. I believe in being a community scholar. We're scholars of our lives. You know your life and what's going on better than anybody with all these numbers and letters behind their names. I don't play that, right? So it is, it's imperative that we take off that regalia and get into the community and stop playing. And I tell people all the time, I'm not from this area. I'm from Compton. And that's where I go. When I go home, that's where I go, Compton and Watts. You know what I mean? And so it's always going to be the same for me. And I agree with Brother Jones in that we know we have colleagues. I mean, we risk it a little something. We got colleagues who this is what the Scholars Program was supposed to be about. Alicia knows that, is being like, we need some folks who represent and look like the communities that are mostly impacted with HIV. So they bring in the scholars. And so we're fighting tooth and nail to say, okay, after we're scholars, we need to be the people who are getting the funding so that we can collaborate with folks like you and be like, no, you need to be on not my community advisory board. You need to be a co-investigator. You need to be getting some of this money. You need to be getting some of this smoke and some of this heat, some of this juice, and some of this love on this grant, and then showing us what it is we're supposed to be doing. Not us. That's why I like the dirt. Not the grassroots, but the dirt that grows the grass is what needs to be cultivated and watered and cared for and loved. So, I am an epidemiologist, but again, I'm at the intersection, again, as we all are, of all of these things, right? So, yeah.
So Tiffany, you can always be my spokesperson. I don't think you should ever think twice about speaking on my behalf. I agree 1000% with what you said. I think those of us who are Black researchers and researchers of color, we do have to hold ourselves to different standards because yes, we matriculate through whatever program, what have you. We don't get to take off that identity and that responsibility and that accountability to our communities. It's not to say that folks who don't identify can't be supportive and useful and use their power and privilege accordingly, but they're never going to understand the way that they do. They are never going to get the benefit of the doubt the way we will from the community. So their responsibility, their accountability, but also their potential to do real good, it's never going to be equivalent, y'all. Like, that's just the reality of it. Right. Sorry, everyone. Sorry if I've offended you. It's the facts. Yeah, and so I think for us, and this goes everything into our next question of just when we say ending the epidemic is not really HIV. It's these other epidemics that we have to attend to around structural racism, around exclusion of resources, particularly when you think about who it is that's actually doing the research, funding the research, leading the research, and in the actual community, and not pandering to the community or ignoring them entirely. So let me get to that next question. And I do see a lot of things in the chat. We're going to come back to them. Yeah, I promise you, we're not going to forget about the chat. The question I wanted to leave before we get to the Q&A portion is, when we say ending the epidemic, if we look at the epidemiology, we know Black people have experienced the highest rates of HIV from inception, even though that's not the way it's always portrayed. We know there's a lot of disparities in the Southern US, and it is Black people who are getting diagnosed with HIV most often. And we also know that in terms of rates of HIV infection, it's the highest among younger adults. It's not to say it's only high there, that's not accurate, but it is highest. The most diagnoses do occur for young people under the age of 30. So my question for you all is, how do we take the research perspective, community perspective, the global perspective? How do we address ending the epidemic for youth Black voices, young Black adults and young voices? Anybody jump in, give me something.
No,
well,
Dr. John, I'm gonna let Dr.
I mean,
Jones.
if you look at it, there's a pattern. Young Black men have been incarcerated, mass incarceration. What they do is, like to say, from the high school to the prison pipeline, what they do is stun their formative years or their productive years between those young ages, 17, 18, say to 30. Young Black men have been locked up and have been getting locked up in alarming rates. Now we look at young Black gay men or same gender loving men who they're saying, we have no more at risk. We don't have no more rapid drug use than our white counterparts. Black men are more likely to use a condom than their white counterparts. This is data, statistical things that say that. we are more at risk because of the system, period. We're most at risk for contracting everything. For instance, young people, and specifically young same gender loving men, MSM used to, men who have sex with men used to denote a behavior, but now it's become an identity. And I don't care if a young man has sex with somebody different every day, it doesn't discount the fact that he may be searching for love. So if we're going to keep calling them MSMs, that means we're reducing everything they do to just sex. Also, we're not targeting young men because young gay men have a relationship with a female in their family. It may not be the mother, it might be the sister, it might be the aunt, it may be the grandmother, it may be just a Judy girlfriend who has that. So until we start educating women, Black women, because they are the network of same gender loving young men. So that's who we have to reach, because we can't reach them because the conversation is not for them, because you won't allow us to educate us. So
That's it.
That's it.
That's the 100%. I love this. I think about the organization in DC, us helping us. You know, we are the ones who have to do the work, you know, and not look for somebody else to have the answers to these questions, which is why we're doing this discussion, which we're having it. I love that. I really am just piggybacking off Brother Jones. Like, honestly, that's why I'm always like, Brother Jones, go first. Cause I'm like, you know, okay, but it's real, you know, because he's right in that the numbers, because I have to go back to the whole research thing, is we see the same thing over and over, right? We are not more likely to engage in risky behaviors. We are not. We did a study and we were like, oh, we're gonna find something. Sis is gonna be doing a whole lot of stuff. The white women, sisters was less likely to have, they were more likely to have on average 2 partners in their lifetime to be safe, you know, not be substance users, this, that, and the other women. The white women had like 99 partners, et cetera, et cetera. But their risk for STIs was like 90% lower. And it was like, we're not doing anything. We aren't, but it's like you said, it's the system, right? So then we got our brothers who are locked up at a young age, et cetera. We've got our mothers who are, you know, aren't sure, you know, how to have conversations around, you know, sexuality with their children. It's, and this is why it bothers me so much that the research or I'll just say the effort as it pertains to Black women isn't what it should be, because that's part of what Brother Jones is saying, is that the woman, not taking anything from the man, are the backbone of this whole community and of the family. And until we educate and just talk to sisters about this is what we need to do. Like I said, with my dad, I was the first person he told. I was like, why are you telling me? I mean, I'm down, you know what I'm saying? But I was like, dang, Dad, I'm 21. Like, let me, you know what I'm saying? And it was just like, he was like, because I knew that you could handle it. And I was like, well, how you know I can handle it? You know, but I handled it. I was like, okay, cool. What are we gonna do next? What's for Thanksgiving dinner? You still cutting a turkey. I don't care what you think you're talking. You cutting a turkey, you're gonna be slicing turkey, you're gonna put the turkey on turkey, you know, kind of thing. And like Brother Jones said, when his mom found out, she was like, okay, what's next? You know what I mean? Like, whether she went back and had to go to the Bible afterward, we don't know. But Mama was like, I got you. You know what I mean? And that is what we do, right? And so that might be the start of it. What Brother said, that might be the start of it. We're at the start of it, having this conversation, but that might be it too.
You do want to say one thing. I always have one thing. Were you finished? I'm sorry.
I'm not. No. It's a conversation. Pretend we at the table together.
If you
Pretend
think about
the table.
The war on drugs was originally created to get Black women, because they had already locked up the men, and the women were holding it down, selling a little weed or whatever to keep the family afloat. So it was originally targeted for Black women. And so if they split up the family by giving men felonies, they can't come back and live in public housing projects.
Thank you.
And that's what was happening then. So how can you expect a family to thrive? So if you take the roots from the family, which is the Black man,
right,
the tree is gonna die. But little did they know that Black women rise up like the phoenix. And that's the part. Also, PrEP needs to be targeted towards Black women, because the tools sometimes, or the questions they use to ask about PrEP, have you had more than 2 sex partners in a 6-month period or whatever? They'll say no. And then, doctors say, oh, well, you're not eligible. But the thing is, she may not want to say that I've only had my husband, but he's had 15 partners, and I need to protect myself.
Yes.
So they're not giving us that information. Also, they're not giving us that information about PEP. White folks know to run to the emergency room and get PEP. Black folks go to the emergency room and they say, oh, what are you talking about? Oh, you're sure. They send you, in our city, somebody went to the emergency room. They told them they had to go to an ASO the next day. We don't know where in the timeline of when you need to access PEP that they may have been in. And it's just discouraging. I'm sorry, Sheila, go ahead.
No, yeah. Go ahead.
I hear you all, but it's kind of different in my country. So actually, we also have a high prevalence of young people being infected, but it's not about drugs. I think it's more about sexual reproductive health services. Here, it's like taboo for a parent to sit down and talk with children. It's something that hardly do. So young people tend to engage in promiscuous things at an age, which is totally different from what you guys were talking about. And then also, when I was working with the Infectious Diseases Research Collaboration, and we were doing research on PrEP, mostly I got young men requesting for PrEP than the women. I think I got like 2 women for the 2 years I was there that really came up and asked for PrEP themselves. So it's mostly about the reproductive health is given to the young people, and so sex education here.
Yeah, thank you for giving us that perspective, Sheila. I think there's a couple things that you said that are so important when it comes to this idea that it's still a young people driven epidemic in some ways, no matter where it is that you're looking. But you said some of that context in your culture and in your community is around sexual reproductive health. And there's a lot of isms there too, right? There's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of gender inequities, and it has everything to do with going back to what Brian said around us educating us. Typically, the family planning resources and programs that are available in Uganda or in a lot of areas in Africa are still led by big global INGOs that are a bunch of places headquartered in the US or the UK or what have you. They are not from the community. They don't know the real education and support that is needed in the community because they're not from there. And frankly, they probably don't need to be there. And so I think that's a really important point that you mentioned. The other thing I want to throw out there, because I know we only have 10 minutes left, we're going to get to the questions, everyone. I know we could talk all day. One thing I want to
Black people, we be like,
quickly.
no, please don't let it be over.
I know that Brian was touching on as well. This has everything to do with that concept of risk. So even the way in which like PrEP counseling happens, or even that sexual reproductive health planning, that counseling, whatever that might look like, risk is often something we throw around. And it's not only a stigmatizing concept, it's usually very inaccurate in the way that we describe it and define it, but risk is not the thing that people are going to recognize within their own lives to say, hey, I need to do this, X, Y, or Z. Yeah. It's just not a meaningful concept. So it has everything to do with us educating us around thriving, not avoiding risk, around thriving. And it has everything to do with who's giving the education and support, for what reason, for what intention, when, how often, who keeps doing it, who's it for, who's it funded by. All of that needs to look different.
One thing, I always have one thing. Oh no, around risk and thriving. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. When I went to South Africa, I went into the dark place, the villages, and what I saw, and Sheila, maybe you can comment on this, was a lot of times it's misogynistic, and the men would have all these sex partners, and the women would contract the virus, and they would move them out of the circle of huts, and they'd be over here somewhere, and they would blame the woman. But no one would ever blame the men or talk to men about sexual attitudes and that kind of thing. And A lot of times we hear people and providers say, well, Black people need to make a choice. We don't have a choice. What we do is what we need to do to survive. HIV and AIDS is not first, second, third, fourth. Eating, sleeping, housing, all those other things take precedent before HIV and AIDS. We don't need another ism to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila, did you want to mention anything before we go to questions?
I'm accepting with Brian, like he has said. So if we are to improve the interventions, they should include all these diverse stakeholders from the different sectors, like you said, housing, criminal justice, education, business sectors, because people normally focus especially like on the individual, interpersonal factors, psychosocial, economic, environmental. They never focus on these other aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's so much bigger than HIV. It's upstream. I think that's the point that you're making as well. Thank you. So let me go to the chat really quickly. We're going to scroll through everyone. We're going to get to them. So the first thing I see is that the thriving piece is something people are really resonating with. The idea that you should be able to thrive and that you should want to be reached by others who look like you is powerful. I saw a comment from Mitchell that says prison abolition and liberation is necessary. I see a few people praising the honest conversation we have had today. Ryan had a comment around Reagan and the harmful presidency that brought in cocaine and targeted the Black community with crack, racism, corruption, homophobia, etc. Rhonda says it's time to address the sociocultural, biomedical, and neurasthenia that is related to the 5 levels of self-care and how that co-occurs with a lot of disorders, and that we want to thrive, not survive, and try to use hope theory, humble, optimistic, people empowered theory. Thank you, Rhonda. So I see a comment from Jamesia that says we have to hold organizations accountable. And I see a question from Ryan, if anyone has seen the documentary on Netflix around crack. I will say I have not seen it, but I have heard wonderful things. Looks like Brian highly recommends it as well.
Wait, where is it?
So it's a Netflix documentary that's called Crack, Cocaine, Corruption, and Conspiracy. So I think that's a recommendation for folks that are just interested in some of the things that Brian touched on around the fact that the Black community was targeted with the war on drugs in the 80s. And that was during the Reagan presidency, and also where we saw the rise of HIV, particularly in Black communities as well.
And they sold drugs to help fund the war on drugs. They put drugs into the Black community to raise money to do the war on drugs. Isn't that backwards?
I see a comment again from Rhonda that says, I have a PhD called Life and Experience. Dr. Jones has one as well. Y'all studied at the same school. I think that's well understood. I see a comment from Julia that says, shame on the government for letting this epidemic continue in Baltimore and DC in their own backyard. It's everywhere, Julia. It's not just in their backyard. But I'll also say, you will often find these large institutions, whether they be academic, governmental, what have you, and the worst disparities you see are right down the street from them. And that has played itself out in every city around the US. It's also definitely something I've seen worldwide as well. But Baltimore, Hopkins, Duke, Durham. I mean, I could name so many where the same thing is happening. And again, it's not just HIV, it's not just COVID. It's all of these things. It doesn't matter which health outcome we're talking about. The inequity in the epidemic goes back to structural racism and all of the isms. It's not about the health outcome, that essentially is just a symptom of the larger issue. So I see a few more comments. Rhonda says, until we address the William Lynch letter, nothing's going to change. Yes. Ryan says, in Kentucky, part of it is most young Black men are in the closet or DL. I don't know if we can say most, but the bottom line is there is stigma going on in the Black community. And in Kentucky, you've also got a lot of drug use and lack of resources and support mechanisms for people who might be more likely to get HIV because of drug use. That again goes back to that education support piece, but I don't think it's accurate to say that most of the young Black men there are in the closet. I wouldn't say that's accurate. I don't know if panelists want to comment on that before.
What closet? We're not in a damn closet. The thing is this, why do we have to be the ones that are in closet? Heterosexual people don't announce, I'm heterosexual. Right. I'm heterosexual today. I like women today. Gay men, young, same gender loving men, gay is not the right term because gay was a white agenda and we were only included to make it seem inclusive. And there is racism and discrimination under the LGBTQ flag. It's not a cute kumbaya moment. So also, we have been told and fed the narrative that being gay is wrong. If we look back to religion, and I'm just going to say this and I'm going to be quiet. Religion was used to train and hold Black folks and Black slaves. And that is how it's been taught via homosexuals and all that. And so the narrative that we've been fed is that it's wrong and it's all this. So young Black men don't have a community. The community doesn't own them. Their family may not own them. The church does not own them. So they have nowhere to go. They're not in the closet. They're not on the down low. This is not something new. Black people have always had to duck and hide, even being just Black. So
I love ducking
Thank
and
you,
hiding. That's
Dr.
basically, it is ducking and hiding. That's exactly it.
Facts. So I see a quote really quickly from Mitchell: white supremacy does not thrive in spite of US criminalization and militarism. It thrives because of it. That's a quote from Marion Kaba. We do this till we free us. That's facts. That's exactly what we've been talking about. I see another comment that MSM is just labeling people and reducing them down to their sexual habits, which I think Brian touched on. Facts. All right, y'all, I'm scrolling. I see we need to free people in prison system. I see more about the Reagan administration. No one should be locked up because it's an inhumane environment. I see a little bit more about the cocaine epidemic. I see Dawn, who made a comment that the targeting of PrEP has been completely off. I think that was to Brian's comment around Black women needing to be more of the focus for PrEP. And I think that's well taken. Kelsey says a lot of healthcare workers are still unfamiliar with PrEP, which is true.
I like this one.
Yes, I think
goes-
Torian's saying that it's interesting we're having a discussion about uplifting youth voices without actually uplifting youth voices. Where are the youth in these conversations? I think that's
that was a question that you had. That was a question that Alicia actually had, was what do we do to uplift youth voices and how do we get youth involved in it ain't got to be research. Everything's, we talk about citizen science. I like citizen science. If you see something, say something. I'm going to age myself, but I really don't care. Whitney Houston said it, right? The children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. It is what it is. We'd be so busy being parents, grandparents, and godparents, and aunties and uncles and stuff. Take your kids outside. Be like, what do you see? I want you to look and tell me what you see. And if there is something that seems off, whatever off is, some people don't know that things aren't wrong in their community. Grow up in the hood and that's it. Have them bring them into the infrastructure, whatever you want to call it. I like that question. I've been looking at it. I never scrolled because I focused on that because I knew that was one of the questions that Alicia was going to ask, which is what do we do to get youth involved? We are some folks that, we got kids, grandkids, auntie, nieces, nephews, cousins and things, but what do we do to bring the youth in, not just stuff, like get them out. Community, so that's an excellent point, Torian.
But young people are involved. An example, when they had the Black Lives Matter and they had a convening here in Cleveland, there were so many young people that called me sir and yes sir and opening doors, and we only see the sagging pants and those who have the drug dealer profile. But there was gobs and gobs of polished, articulate Black folks. If you go to our AIDS conference, there are a lot of Black people, Black young men who are on the ball and who are running things, but they're stifled by the ASOs and the white folks who want to just stay in those spots. They take our ideas. These young people come up with these ideas instead of letting them run it when they write the grant. Then the ASO wants to take over. So they're not getting credit, they're not being moved up, and they're not being visible because the system is stifling them.
That's well understood. I also want to throw out there, Torian, just because you don't see youth on this panel does not mean that they don't color and guide the work of every one of the four panelists that you see, right? So I would caution against that assumption. And I can tell you there are youth that I have employed and they guide me on every single one of my projects. They are paid more than some of my other specialists. I paid for them to come to this conference because they wanted to be at a conference. So please trust and believe. You might hear my voice, but it is guided by youth every step of the way. So I would caution that assumption. I also want to say, I'm sorry, y'all, that we are out of time today. This conversation has been everything. I hold you, Brian. I hold you, Sheila. Tiffany, you already knew you were my person.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a meetup in Kampala, right? I feel like we had
Oh,
said
yes,
that. I
we
just wanted to
will.
go back
Let's
and
do
say,
Yes,
it.
looking
all right, cool.
forward. Thank
Oh,
you.
sure.
Cool.
It's
Just
so nice to
confirming.
see everyone.
Thank you all for
All
joining
right,
us.
contact my publicist if you need me to speak.
Oh, Lord.
But
Yes,
I'm not politically
I love it.
correct. So
their
if you
advocacy
want politically
all
correct,
day.
it's not me.
All day.
All day.
Have a
Thank you
good
all
day.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining
Bye-bye.
us.
Thank you, everyone.